Hey folks, Dave Temple here. Before we get into the show, I just wanted to take this brief moment to say thank you for listening and supporting the Thriller Zone now in our 8th season. There's a little feature on the back end of our host that tells us some metrics and analytics about the show, which I like to geek out about from time to time. And one of them is this. It shows me where our listeners are listening. Our predominant amount of audience is listening in the United States. Thanks, hometown. Also, our second most listened to country is Australia, followed by Germany, the United Kingdom, South Africa, Canada, Russia, and Denmark. So I want to say hello to all the folks who are listening there. And then we wrap up with Brazil, Ireland, Finland. We're popular in Hong Kong, India, Italy, Austria, and Belgium. Lastly, in Kenya, Sweden, the Netherlands, Macau, Poland, Romania, Singapore, Switzerland, Taiwan, and Ukraine. This is every place that we are being heard. So, hello, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for your support. And if you haven't yet, drop me a note, would you? Just send it to thethrillerzone@gmail.com. I'll be sure to get it. And if you say hello, give me your name and the city you're living in. I'll be happy to say hello to you and welcome you to our community. Again, thank you so much for listening and supporting. And we can't wait to meet you electronically in person. All right, now to the show. Hello and welcome to the 212th episode of The Thriller Zone. I'm your host, Dave Temple, and today is a special day as we welcome the OG of legal thrillers, Scott Turow. Scott's with us to discuss his latest thriller, Presumed Guilty, the follow-up to his runaway bestseller that literally put him on the map with Presumed Innocent. If you read the book, then you're aware of Scott's vast expertise in the world of legal court action. Also, if you recall, Harrison Ford played the original Rusty Savage back in 1990. Then just last year, Jake Gyllenhaal starred in the same role, but with a very different take on the lead, as you will hear on today's show. Okay, that's enough preamble. Let's welcome Scott Turow to the Thriller Zone.
How are you?
Yeah, good. It's so nice to meet you. What an honor.
Oh, you're a boy. Okay, that and a nickel will get you on the subway. But
wait a minute, a nickel went way. That's a long time ago, wasn't it?
I know. I meant to be old-fashioned with the response.
Well, it is so nice to see you. I'll start out of the gate with a great big old geek moment of when I say that, you know, you're one of my heroes. It sounds so corny, but man, I remember, geez, this was been about mid to late 80s. Yeah, it must have been, was it 87 when this book came out? Yeah, because I remember... I remember you bounced on the scene. I'm like, who is this guy? And I think I want to start off with this. What does it feel like? And either I read this somewhere, Scott, or I made this up, but what does it feel like to be regarded as kind of the pioneer of that legal thriller?
I always refer, David, to Presumed Innocent as like riding a rocket ship. And, you know, you have to bear in mind I'm a guy who had tried unsuccessfully to publish book-length fiction for probably 20 years. And then all of a sudden, and I finished Presumed Innocent, which I'd begun on the morning commuter train, working for 3 months in my basement. And then all of a sudden, I'm this author of this worldwide #1 bestseller that's, you know, going to supposedly become a movie.
Yeah.
And it was an out of body experience. And I have to say that, you know, what I thought I was doing to start was yoking a more literary, psychologically accurate novel with a mystery.
Right.
So I resisted, you know, the legal thriller label at first, because, you know, I thought I'd written a novel. You know, the reality, as I certainly became familiar with, is people who want to read my books and treat them in the first instance as interesting plots do no disservice to me. And I'm happy to have readers on whatever terms they arrive. So, you know, I ultimately came to regard it as a great honor to be referred to as the father of the modern legal thriller.
All right, so I want to make sure I get this right and make sure I heard this right because it is early. Um, 20 years you were writing before this happened?
Yeah. In other words, I had announced to my friends and family by the time I was 8 years or 10 years old that I was going to be a novelist. And that had been my mother's ambition that she never was able to achieve for herself. Um, and, I went to college saying I'm going to be a novelist. Um, and by the time I graduated from college, I put together a novella and 4 stories. And then, and I was lucky enough to win one of the writing fellowships at Stanford. So uh, I was out at Stanford writing for 5 years, 2 as a fellow and 3 as a lecturer in the English department. And during that period of time, I had again written um, a, I wrote a novel, not a terrible novel, but a novel that was not, it didn't arrive in New York at the right time in the sense that it was a hippie novel when America was sick of hippies. So then when I was in the period I became an assistant U.S. attorney after 1L, my book about law school, was published, I had written a, a good short story, but I had then tried to sort of thin the soup because it was too long as a short story to really get published. About 30 pages is too long for a short story, at least in the existing marketplace. So I extended it to a work of, a very short novel. And my then agent, Gail Hockman, called me up and she said, I've got a young editor who's interested in this book. And I said, forget it. Forget it. I'm working on something else. And Gail, who knew my history, which also included something that I'd written as a lark in college. So that those are the 4 works of fiction that went unpublished. She said she was ready to crawl down the phone line and choke me because, she's finally got someone interested. And I say, forget it. I'm working on something better. But that young editor was John Galassi, who ultimately became my editor on Presumed Innocent.
Wow. I'm trying to imagine what it would be like because this is a story I'd never heard before. How somebody has that intention or that dream early on and says, this is what I want. This is where I'm going, which I feel very familiar with. And then not to see it happen perhaps as quickly as you had dreamed. And you're trudging along and you're banging out the words and you're like, man, is this going to happen or not? And then kaboom. And then from then on, everything else is just,
There's a story I don't tell very often where it was very late at night and all of this stuff with Presumed Innocent had happened. And I find myself, and I don't cry very often, but I found myself overcome and weeping in my living room as I sat there by myself. And what I kept saying to myself was, I had wanted it so bad. I didn't even understand what that meant, but I was responding to the intensity of ambition that had propelled me for a number of years, both as a young writer, having, middling to marginal success, and then writing despite how hard it was to do in both law school and, when I started out as a young prosecutor. There's always a disjunction, right, between dreaming of something and having it come true.
right.
I am married to one of the most beautiful women I have ever seen in my life. But I stopped thinking of her that way, not long into when our relationship began. And I see her as she is to me, somebody I adore and who loves me too. And Presumed Innocent was the same way. You're still yourself. There is no magical transformation. #1 bestseller, movie deal, whatever it is, you're still yourself.
Yeah.
And so I look back um, at that period of wild, unsatisfied ambition. And it wasn't like I thought it was wasted energy or anything like that. It was just, um, but it was almost as if, God, I wish I could have channeled those emotions differently.
Yeah.
Um, and I will also say to you, as I often tell people, if you can become the author of the #1 worldwide bestseller, I recommend it to you. You should do that because it's a lot of fun. I had and have always a tremendous amount of fun with the success that my writing has brought me. So I've enjoyed it. Nothing is better than having the freedom to write. So I don't mean to diminish it. I'm just saying that um, it was the ambition and the reality colliding with each other, and it was an important moment for me just to
You
recognize that.
I think of the phrase, it's never as good as the first time, but have you ever been able to experience that level of pure thrill again since?
Well, a short answer, no, but for a couple of reasons. Um, one is Euripides, you can't step in the. Is it Euripides? No, it's Ecclesiastes. You can't step in the same stream twice.
Okay.
Um, but the other was that, um, I'd written one short story in college that was published in a sort of, I got up from a fever bed and wrote for 16 hours. But aside from that experience, I had never had the feeling, as certainly while working on a novel, of sort of having the wind under my wings. And that summer that I took off from the law to finish Presumed Innocent, uh, I had this feeling suddenly like I was using everything I had learned, both in those years, pining to become a novelist and as a young lawyer. Um, and it was all coming out in this manuscript. So no, you can't duplicate that.
Right.
You try to go back to it. And I have to say, writing, Presumed Guilty, because I was in Rusty's voice again,
Yeah.
I had a lot of that feeling, that, I got this. I really, I have this. And that's the advantage, of course, of having many, many years under your belt. But, you can only be young once. I think Aaron, novel, has a minister who says that, you can't live backwards.
Yeah.
You can't have first love twice.
No. Well, what's interesting, by the way, I love the book. It's everything you expect from Scott Turow, and it's so. How can I say this without sounding like a complete idiot? There's such a density and such a fullness to it, meaning there's constant backstory and front story and nuance and double meanings and layers throughout every single page. And, it's getting close to 600. So the world is so full. And what my mind kept thinking was like, okay, that was 87. It's many, many years later. And you feel like, as I was reading this, I feel the exact same way I felt when I was reading Presumed Innocent. I just feel like I had kind of gone away for a little break, come back, and there I was in the world again. And to me, that's a challenging thing to do. And bravo to you.
Yeah, both my agent and my editor now is a guy at Grand Central named Ben Severe, who's both the editor-in-chief and publisher. And um, that was the remark they made to me. It was what Gail, my agent, who read the first draft, said. She says, "This just feels to me like reading Presumed Innocent." And,
Yeah.
and that's, if I knew, if I knew how to do that every time, I'd bottle it, but I don't. Um, but it was because as I was writing, had that same feeling of momentum, and
Yeah.
not just momentum, but what you just articulated, because I think that's really astute, which is that there's a kind of fullness to the imagined world. That it's like you could stop this guy at any point and tell you six stories.
Yes. And that is such a talent and a gift because it takes nuance to the next level. But here's a question that kept going through my head the whole time. Well, no, first of all, I got to say this because Harrison Ford has become easily one of the biggest movie stars of our time. And I'm trying to think to myself where his career was in 87. That's not essential. My real point is to say, how did it make you feel? I've spoken to hundreds of authors on this show over the 3 years now in our season 8, and I've always heard them say, "Oh, my dream would be to have it turned into a TV series or a film." So you had
Mm-hmm.
that, and I'm trying to. I want to hear how that felt because you knew that they were talking about, "Hey, we want to option this thing," and you're like, "Okay, well, I've heard those stories." But how did it
Right,
feel when all of a sudden the key clicked, it dropped, the cylinders dropped, and you're like off to the races with Harrison Ford?
right. Well, first of all, I would say when Harrison went to work on Presumed Innocent, he was probably the biggest movie star in the United States. The third Indiana Jones movie had just come out. He'd been at the Smithsonian donating Indiana's hat to the museum. And then from there, literally came directly to Chicago to have lunch with me and to talk about, the book and the movie. And I came to and continue to like Harrison Ford tremendously. He presented himself as, like me, just another guy from the north side of Chicago. But it's a little bit of what we were talking about before. Yeah, the dream is it becomes a movie. And and my first dream has always been to be the writer, um, and to that feeling that I described before while writing Presumed Innocent or writing Presumed Guilty, the wind under your wings.
Yeah.
That remains to me the biggest thrill. But there's no question, you realize when Harrison Ford shows up for lunch, a lot of people are going to see this movie. And but what I've always tried to do, and I've been lucky enough to have been through many adaptations, not all of them have become visible to the world. My friend Rick Patterson has a line that I love that movie deals are like sperm. Many are called, but few are chosen, and that 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 is the truth. And I have been through such. I've seen the way that process works. I've one show that was greenlighted, um, and then the director got into a fight with the studio after the production office was open, and it cratered. So it's always a miracle when anything gets filmed. Um, but it's fun hanging around with movie stars. Let's not pretend.
Yeah.
And Ryan Dennehy became a really close friend up until his last days. He was a remarkable, not only actor but also intellect. And I loved it dearly. And it's in the sense that you are with Harrison or with Brian or any of the directors that have become, my good friends like John Abnett or Mike Rowe. You're hanging around with really interesting creative people, and it's fun in itself. David Kelly's another one I would name. Yeah, there's a project there, but there's also the people who they are, and um, and that's neat in and of itself. Ellen Pakula, who directed Presumed Innocent and really wrote the screenplay, is another one. And the pure pleasure of the relationships also takes a place along with what they're doing. And um, but at the end of the day, is it unbelievable to be sitting on a movie set. The series, the Presumed Innocent series, when Adrian and I visited the set for a few days, they happened to be filming the courtroom scenes. So you start with there's 400 extras there, right?
Yeah.
And the entire huge staff that it takes to make a film, particularly something that close to 8 hours of film. And you look around and it, it's like, okay, this is something that I carried around in my head with me. And in the case of Presumed Guilty, I was thinking of this book for 20 years. It's like this was my idea for 20 years, and look at all these people running around making it real.
Yeah.
So again, I recommend that experience to anyone who can have it. You'll enjoy it.
Well,
talking about getting kissed by fate. I mean, so you write for
Good
20
term.
years. Yeah. And then, thank you. And then you create this book. It's a whirlwind. You got an international movie star. And then here's the cherry on top. Years later, it comes back around, which is where I got to enjoy it again. And I could not get enough of that television series. Thank you. I think it was Apple TV. And when I saw Jake Gyllenhaal, who I, among others, have quite a man crush on, and I got to see him inhabit this character, I'm like, oh, we are off to the races. And I could not get enough. I mean, talking about being blessed, Scott.
Well, I have lived a blessed life.
Yeah.
And I am keenly aware of that. I do not, like the last line of Presumed Guilty, I try to live with gratitude, and I do, most of the time.
Let's take a short break, and when we return, Scott shares some inside scoop on the set of Presumed Innocent. Stay with us.
I have a very special announcement that is available right now. Many of you have asked if you could promote your books on the Thriller Zone. Well, now there is. For a limited time only, if you'd like to promote a current or upcoming release in either a 30 or a 60-second commercial, you can do so right now. Just contact me via our website at thethrillerzone.com and hit the contact button. Let me know if you want a 30 or a 60-second spot. Again, this is a limited time offer. So if you have a book you released yesterday or will release tomorrow, contact me right now for this limited time offer, and we'll get your book on the entire back catalog of shows. Then get ready to share your stories that thrill.
Hey Dave, I wanted to leave you a quick message and congratulate you on launching season number 8. Man, what a thrilling ride it's been so far. You are always keeping your audience of writers at the forefront of your mind, and that's what is exciting to hear each and every podcast. Certainly brought in the new year with some serious hitters. I just want to say good luck, and I can't wait to see what the rest of 25 brings us. I know it's going to be fun. I'm proud of you, brother. Love ya.
When we were on the set for Presumed Innocent, and I like to say that you're getting old when you're alive to see the remake. So, but it was hard to tell how things were going on that set. What we saw filmed, wonderful performance by Jake. There's no way around that. Much different interpretation of the character than Harrison Ford, who I thought Harrison kind of played the guy I wrote, whereas Jake brings all that inner emotion that Rusty just shared with the reader. He brought it out, and so he's the more high-strung and volatile Rusty Savage, and because he's great at what he does, that worked. But there were, besides Jake and besides the incredibly talented cast, Ruth Negga, who plays Barbara, Rusty's wife, and she had, by the way, her hands full because the series was written like many projects in television. they did not have all the scripts. So Ruth is saying, this is a really hard job. I don't know whether I committed this murder or not. I've read the book, but I don't know what David is going to choose to do. But what I was going to say is, besides Jake and Ruth, and the other members of that incredibly talented cast, you've got two other very significant creative forces, three really. Number one is David Kelly, who's he's really a genius at what he does, and he really was the number one creative force behind this project. He also oversaw a lot of the editing, from what I have told, what I'm told. And then there's Dusty Thomason from Bad Robot, who's both a novelist and a very successful screenwriter himself, and has had his own shows on TV. And it was Dusty who was running the set. And there are a lot of challenges on this set, including because the writer's strike is looming. And, they got to get it done. David turned in the last script moments before the writer's strike began. And, it was Dusty who was able to hold it together. And he ought to be appointed Secretary of State. It took great diplomatic skills to do what he did. And I know he also made significant creative contributions. And Greg Yattanis, who was directing the episodes we saw, he's also great at what he does. And he was also great, and I think this is very hard for a director to do. Jake Gyllenhaal comes from a family of directors. His father, Stephen Gyllenhaal, whom I got to meet and, in brief acquaintance, really adored. And his mom, who's now long gone, Naomi Foner, was also a director. His sister Maggie is now directing. And, I'm sure there were moments when Jake wanted to take over the set, and Greg knew when to stand back and let him do that, which is, again, that is not easy to do when it's really your set and you're in charge of what's happened.
But the magic happens when you have this entourage of highly focused and talented individuals who are performing at the best of their business, and they all come together, and it's really a dance. Having worked in the business for years, I understand this, and it's beautiful to watch. It's a dance, and if there's mutual respect and admiration, you're good to go. If the battle of the egos gets in the way, then you're a foobar. There's something I want to ask, and I realize it's loaded, and I don't want to put you on the spot, and simultaneously, I don't want to give anything away and spoil it for our listeners. But
yeah,
can you say, that close, as the movie starts to close, the TV series starts to close, there is a very significant scene, we'll just say that, a very significant hook that happens. Did you have a preference, and again, I know it's putting you on the spot, between the way the Harrison Ford version ended versus the way the Jake Gyllenhaal version ended?
Mind telling your listeners / viewers that the series ends differently than the movie ended. And, that was part because David's an artist in his own right and wanted to make it his own. I think there's some commercial considerations there because if the word gets out that it's just the same ending, I think that will dull viewer interest. It's hard for me to react because, of course, the ending in Alan's film is the ending that I wrote. It's different from the book to the movie, though. In the movie, there's a long soliloquy by the murderer, by a very, very talented actor who carries it off. The book has this insulation of Rusty explaining to his best friend, the detective, how the murder took place, which has left many readers questioning me over the years as well, is he actually innocent or guilty? Alan's movie, for very good reasons, gave that doubt away. So, would I have given David some notes had he turned the script in time to get the notes? Sure. But I wouldn't have recommended major revisions or said, no, you should have done it my way. I would have had a couple of thoughts, very much like I get from, Ben Severe, my editor, which is, I think there's a couple of things you can do to make this more what you wanted it to be. But, that was the hazard of the writer's strike. And again, you want to talk about one of these small miracles that can happen on a movie set. The whole thing came together anyway. I think the strong reaction to Presumed Innocent series, it doesn't need my endorsement. But I still thought it was a really good adaptation of what I had done.
I will never forget. This will go down in my memory book as one of my favorite. My wife and I, Tammy, we watch a lot of content. And so we've learned, I think she'll say very kindly, well, she'll call out something that I didn't see, or she'll go, oh, I bet you this is going to happen. And I'm like, how did you see that? She goes, well, I'm married to a writer, first of all. Second of all, we've been watching enough content that I'm kind of picking up some things. But I will never forget the minute that reveal happens, and we both literally, jaws hanging in the air, turned to each other and went, oh my God. And I tease that with such passion because if you haven't seen the series, just drop what you're doing this week and just go spend that time. But boy, when I saw that, I was like, mind blown.
Yeah. Well, Apple had a big hit with it. And as I said, a lot of people get credit, but at the end of the day, you just got to take off your hat to David Kelly because he's really good, really good.
And I'm trying to think how long he's been doing this. I mean, he's that good for a very long time. I'm thinking, I'm seeing his name on the screen in my mind's eye for decades. I'm talking about
decades.
I want to say 70s.
I don't know.
80s.
David's younger than I am, so it would 80s for sure.
Yeah.
I think the first successful show he had on was a really good show, not as widely viewed as his succeeding shows, called Picket Fences, but it was good enough that it established his career. It was a really nice show. And then, of course, he had Ally McBeal, and that was a huge hit. And that, and again, David went to law school, and David decided to, go to Hollywood. And Ally McBeal allowed him to begin to exploit that education, which he's never really left behind. He's written a lot of law-related stuff over the years, whether it's Boston Legal or I'm not coming up with all the right examples, but he stayed in what was the other one? I'm forgetting the name of the series before Boston Legal, but I think I've never talked to him about it, so I can't speak for him. But I imagine it's kind of a period of discovery for him too, with especially with the success of Ally McBeal, and now he's now kind of number one name in what gets called long form or periodic or limited series television. I think Taylor Sheridan is probably also vying for that trophy, but there's enough room for both.
Yeah. I was going to say before David would have been maybe Stephen Cannell.
For sure.
Yeah. Operating in that same, and that's probably where my mind was on the 70s, because that's where Stephen was really rocking it in the 70s.
Right.
Then David comes along. And you're right. Taylor Sheridan, just to go off for 10 seconds on this, I have never seen a guy come out of nowhere with so much prolific talent and so many storylines and just have one hit after another. And just about the time I'm getting all wrapped up in the Western worlds, I started drilling down and find out what he had written before those. And I'm like, whoa. I mean, just crazy talent.
Yeah. I mean, people are always amazed by how prolific David is. And we were having a conversation, and he said to me, David, what you unquestionably would say yourself, and what you've heard countless authors say, which is, he says, well, I just hear the characters talking. And it's like he's taking transcription. And that's, again, with screenwriting, which is much more dialogue. that accounts for how quickly he can do this.
Yeah. I've been studying metaphysics for years and just the science of the mind and this, that, and the other. And I have spent a lot of time considering the muse and the magic of the muse and so forth. But that you just coined that phrase that I absolutely love. And that is, and I think it's when you really get tuned into the muse or your inner voice or your enlightened self or your higher self, whatever that thing is, because you've got to have put in the work to be able to hear the voice, so to speak. But when you dial that in and you're able to really sit there and transcribe and you hear those characters so clearly, you know that you are in your gift zone. The talents, gifts you've been given, you're in the zone. You got to honor that, work it, be loyal to it and fair to it, and and also keep your ass in the chair to do the hard work of just bang, bang.
That was just the point that I wanted to follow on, which is, I had a lot of great teachers over the course of my writing career. And two of the best were Wallace Stegner, great American novelist, and a great teacher, far less known as a writer, Richard Scowcroft. And Dick and Wally always said the same thing in the advanced writing seminar. And there are people sitting there who are going to go on to great careers like, Raymond Carver or Alice Hoffman. But the one thing, Dick would put this very much in the terms that you just did, David, which is, you have to put your behind in the chair every day. And there are days when Muse will not visit, but you have to give her a chance to arrive.
Yeah. If you're not present when she shows up, she might be scratching her head going, well, I'm here doing my part. Where are you?
Right. Right.
Your books explore so many themes of, the classics, corruption, morality, complexities of the legal system, as my inner voice goes down. But I wonder, did you feel when you were practicing law, did you feel like you, and I hope this isn't, what do you think? Do you feel like you were making a difference, A, and P, if you had to do it over again, knowing what you know now, would you have done that journey any differently?
Well, the second question, the answer is unquestionably I would not have done. In terms of my professional career, I would have done anything differently. I was blessed along the way, and it's one of those lucky things that happens to a lawyer. I had great cases in terms of those being consequential in the community that I lived in. And that would include things like prosecuting a number of lawyers and judges who were busy corrupting the state courts in Cook County. And I regard it, some prosecutions, the system is almost invulnerable to reform. But when it came to the judiciary, I really thought there was enough esteem attached to being a judge that you could attract people to doing that who didn't need the incentive of the bribes they could take on the side. And I'm sure that the Cook County Judiciary, and I've experienced it, is a far more wholesome place than it was in those days. And then when I switched sides, it's agonizing. But I was lucky enough to be asked to represent a man who had been twice convicted of a horrible murder. And since the person talking to me about the case was the former chief of the Illinois State Police. And he said, and by the way, this guy is innocent. I thought, well, this is, I don't really believe it. I don't think you could convict an innocent person twice in the United States, and I was wrong. But, that case and everything surrounding had tremendous impact in Chicago, and really became a formative lesson for a lot of people about the death penalty, because my client had spent 5 years on death row and 12 years before he was finally exonerated, and because those then there were three cases that were three defendants, because they were so high profile. It really gave a lot of people second thoughts about the death penalty in Illinois, and for that and many other reasons, the death penalty has been abolished in Illinois, and without a lot of complaints, by the way, without a lot of complaints from the residents of Illinois. It's not like, oh, I wish we still had the death penalty. You're very, very little. So, in terms of having an impact on the community, yeah, I think I've been very lucky to have those kinds of cases.
Quick question came out of nowhere, popped into my head, so I'm going to ask it. Do you know
Sure.
my friend David Ellis?
Oh, for sure. For sure. Dave Ellis showed up as an associate on a case where my firm and his firm were representing the same client. And so that's how I first got to know him. And I still regard him as a really good friend. I called him a few years ago because I was thinking of tossing my hat into the ring for a judicial position. And I said to David, how do you do this? Because Dave Ellis, who, for the people who may not recognize the name, Dave Ellis is both an appellate court judge in Illinois and a very successful writer of what you have to call legal thrillers. Also teams with James Patterson in many of his books. I said, so Dave, how are you doing this? He says, well, I get up at 3:30 a.m. every day, and I work until I have to take the kids to school. And I was like, you can stop there. I'm too old for that to sound good, but he's both a very good writer and a very good judge. And it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that he works very hard in order to do that.
And on top of all that, probably one of the nicest, most down-to-earth, funniest guys I've ever met, and just a prince among men.
He is an absolute prince and a very good lawyer.
Yeah, and a hell of a writer. Well, I realize that I am getting out of time. I have so many questions. I'm going to pass by some of them. There's so many things. There's one I want to ask. It's so good. It's another two-parter. I'm famous for this, Scott, in case you didn't notice. Now, do you think technology, especially the development of forensics, has made it harder or easier to create suspense and reasonable doubt? And that could be a yes or no. And has the prevalence of forensic TV shows changed readers' expectations about how legal cases unfold? So it's a little twofer there you got.
Yeah. Well, the answer to the second one is unquestionably, and you will hear prosecutors frequently get up and particularly in cases where there's no DNA, they'll sort of apologize for that in the beginning. Just, go, this isn't a DNA case. We don't have any biological evidence here. And by the way, that doesn't mean that you can't find the defendant guilty, because juries have come to expect the kind of scientific certainty you get out of DNA. I will point out, Presumed Innocent, that I wrote, DNA 37 years ago was just in its infancy.
Yeah.
And prosecutors were still fighting against its admission. And Whether it would create or negate suspicion, I'll leave to you and the people listening to us. But if I went with the same facts as I had in Presumed Innocent, Rusty Savage would have been convicted after about 5 minutes of jury deliberation. So would it have been a better story with this innocent guy sitting in the clink? I don't know, but it would have been very different. And for that reason, just as a starter, when both David Kelly and Dusty Thomason called me about making this TV show, they both said, well, there got to be changes. And I said, yeah, well, let me stop you right there. We're going to have to start with the plot, because otherwise this guy's going to prison. That may not be what you have in mind.
Wow. Well, I'm going to wrap with a classic question that I end all my shows with, and you're going to be probably the best professor in quite some time here. So students, listen up. What is that best piece of writing advice that you would give my listeners who are aspiring writers?
This one I have no question, and that is writers write. If you want to hang around in a bar talking to other writers, that does not make you a writer. If you want to read great books and never put your tush in the chair, you're still not a writer. And if you are some clueless wannabe who doesn't know anything better than to just try to do it, you're a writer. You're a writer. You may not be a successful writer at first, but this is a craft that, as my friend from Stanford, Tom Zigel, likes to put it, you got to log a lot of pages in most instances. And that journey to figuring out how to connect words to thoughts and feelings, that's a long road for most of us. And you just have to sit down and learn to master it. I'm lucky enough that Phil Knight, has written to me occasionally about my books. And I wrote back to him once, and Phil Knight, of course, the founder of Nike, and I said, you stole the writer's slogan, which is just do it.
That's so good. So good. Well, folks, the first book was Presumed Innocent. The second book is Presumed Guilty. And I got to tell you something. There's no way of saying one is better than the other. You just got to read both of them. And if you haven't read Presumed Innocent, go ahead and buy that one too, so you can get up to speed. And when you open up Presumed Guilty, it'll feel like just a natural continuation. Scott, this has been a real honor. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, David, an absolutely great interview. Thank you. So well prepared, so incisive, and good luck, by the way, too. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Your number one podcast for stories that thrill, the Thriller Zone.
Hey folks, Dave Temple here with a quick request. If you enjoy this podcast, find value in it, and if you find yourself learning something from the bevy of talented writers I'm lucky enough to have on the show, I'm asking you for one small favor. Okay, maybe two, but certainly less than four. Number one, would you take 10 seconds and go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@thethrillerzone. Be sure to follow and subscribe. Yep, that's it. Number two, when you have 2 minutes, swing by our website. It's thethrillerzone.com. Click on that little red microphone at the bottom right corner of the screen. P.S. It works on your cell phone too. Once you click it, a box is going to pop up. Click the box that reads Start Recording and leave us a message. Now you're thinking, what kind of a message, Dave? Well, it can be, we love your show, or how about more fill in the blank? Whatever that is. Record a quick message and we'll share your prolific pontifications with our international audience in an upcoming show. All right, that's pretty much it. I'm Dave Temple, your host. I'll see you next time on another edition of The Thriller Zone.